It is the News Blitz with Randy Wang on Talk Radio 790 KABC. We're here every single day from 5 to 6 talking about the local issues that matter to you most and taking your phone calls at 800-222-KABC, 1-800-222-5222. We read your emails as well at randykabc@gmail.com and follow the podcast. Search the KABC News Blitz on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. Karen Bass went to UCLA to do a little bit of a town hall to talk about her number one issue, the reason she decided to run for mayor. She wants to solve homelessness in Los Angeles.
It's not a namsy-pamsy thing.
It would not be a namsy-pamsy thing. Let's hear what Karen Bass had to say to the crowd at UCLA as she was asked about things like Measure A, other cities doing better than Los Angeles, substance use, mental health, housing, and the success of her signature program, Inside Safe. Here is what Karen Bass had to say about Measure A. And you see what just happened? I've been covering Karen Bass so long that now I'm rhyming just what I'm setting up a Karen Bass clip.
If you're feeling down, if you're feeling blue, let's get help for you.
All right, here's what Karen Bass had to say at UCLA.
The election also brought the passage of Measure A. Talk about that a little, and that's estimate.
So if you don't remember, Measure A is the county measure that passed pretty handily that got rid of the county quarter-cent sales tax for Measure H, turned it into a half-cent sales tax in Measure A, and this one doesn't ever expire. It's a permanent sales tax increase in LA County to fund more housing and services. Karen Bass apparently wrote a bunch of it, and she campaigned heavily on it, and it did pass.
Estimates I've seen are $1 billion a year, commencing pretty much right away, right? How do you see that money furthering your efforts, and what can we expect or hope from that?
So in our conversations over the last 2 years, you know that one of my biggest concerns has been services. I mean, I'm a little different in the sense that my background is in the medical field, so I look at things through that lens. And I think a real weakness in the system has been standards around services.
Yes, because services can mean a whole bunch of things, including getting you an appointment with a psychiatrist or a psychologist, or services could mean I handed you a water bottle. And there's not really any accountability for where this money is going and what it's being spent on.
Accountability in terms of what's your outcome. I mean, it's great you housed 10 people, but what happened to them? How long did they stay housed?
Yeah.
And if they fell out of housing, why did they fall out of housing? And so
Apparently, in the 10 years we've had Measure H and Triple H, we don't know any of this.
And so I believe that it has been a weak link. By the way, the van outside and UCLA's street medicine and the work that they do. I told them, are they here? Are they in here? I don't know if they stayed in here. But anyway, well, there you are.
They might be busy assisting someone that just OD'd.
But anyway, well, there you are back there, hiding. I see you. I feel the medical community has not stepped up, that housing first has meant literally housing first. And to me, it should be housing and services first.
This is a small but significant step in the right direction because Housing First has been the monolith of the state of California for at least 10 years. I believe Holly Mitchell tried to make that the official policy when she was in the legislature. And Housing First means all that matters is we get you into a house. Then we'll figure everything else out. Well, the problem with that is some people are not ready to be in a house. They need a lot more than that. And if you leave someone to their own devices in a single room occupancy unit in a hotel or a motel, and you have not worked on their drug problem, and they bring drugs into the motel, they may end up overdosing in the motel. And unlike when it happens on the street, someone might happen upon them. When they're inside the room, they may not.
That housing first has meant literally housing first. And to me, it should be housing and services first. So it's part of critiquing the system as well. So the part that I participated in terms of writing Measure A, was the accountability measures.
She got so excited there.
Was the accountability measures.
Accountability measures.
Accountability measures.
Accountability measures.
Accountability measures.
What happened, Karen?
The outcome, having things based on outcome, and also having services clearly defined.
Of course, as we discovered last week, part of the problem with the accountability that is supposed to be in all the new money being raised by Measure A is we're going to have a board that looks at what programs are successful and what programs are not successful. And what we found out last week was Nithya Raman, the head of the homelessness committee in Los Angeles City, was trying to make sure that it was the nonprofit service providers who directly benefit from Measure A that would be on the board evaluating themselves. How does that make any sense? Even Imelda could point that one out.
And I do not fault for 1 minute the community-based organizations. They are working way beyond, what they have the resources for. But we have to do better because I believe, and we'll see, the future will tell, but I believe that if services were much stronger, much more focused, much more consistent, that people would stay housed longer because we would address what their problems were.
Despite that, though, what the policy has been with Karen Bass, and she's been mayor of Los Angeles and Inside Safe, is that we get them in the hotel, then we'll deal with everything later, acknowledging that this is way too expensive and not a solution, but she believes doing nothing is worse. And she might be right about that, but we're still barely putting a dent into the problem, and now we're going broke trying to just do that.
And
So that's what Measure A.
So yeah, how does Measure A help you with that?
So part of Measure A goes to building housing.
I see.
Okay.
Wait, you just talked about how what we really need is services and accountability. No, what we really need is the housing.
I see.
Okay. But part of Measure A goes to the services. So when voters passed Measure H years ago, it provided services that was about to expire. So Measure A basically cancels out Measure H early because Measure H was supposed to go out in 27. It cancels it out early and replaces it. It is a sales tax.
Because you remember when we were sold Measure H in the county and Triple H in the city, we were told if we sign on to this, we tax ourselves, they say they'll solve the problem in 10 years.
It is a sales tax, and it's permanent. And one of the things and that was a criticism of it, by the way, especially from the business community, that leaving it as permanent. But I think that...
Well, yes, because you're telling us that you're never going to solve the problem, that it is an unsolvable problem, then you just need more money to manage the problem. But again, it passed. We knew this.
But I think that, we were overly optimistic in H and HHH being 10 years. I mean, I've been here 2 years now in this position, and this is going to take a while. I mean, it took us 30 years to get to where we are now. And I watch this, for the young people in the room, we have an entire generation that has grown up thinking that it's normal to have tents on the street. And I think
Well, I don't think anybody thinks it's normal, but I think what we think is normal is that LA isn't doing enough about it.
And I think we have to let go of that. This is not normal, and this was not always here. Yeah. And so, but on the other hand, it did take 30 years to get here. It's not going to take 2 years to magically change the whole system.
Karen Bass is then asked, is it money that's the problem, or do you have enough money? Because we just doubled the amount of money that the county's getting. The state has spent more money than ever. The feds have spent more money than ever. Everybody's spending more money.
I've heard you say, in fact, I heard you over at the Chancery Club just the other day, in answer to a question saying you didn't feel you needed more power, but you did feel you needed more money to address this problem. Does Measure H provide you enough money to really?
No, it absolutely is not enough. It's what we could get now. For example, in the city of LA.
How much would be enough? I'd love to ask that question. What is the exact dollar figure you need to get 75,000 people in the county off the street? Because what I would like to see is if they could quantify that number, figure out, whether it's the housing, whether it's the services, anything, quantify how much you need to get the 75,000 people we have off the streets in the county. Then I would like to divide that number by all the people in that population And C, would it be more effective if we just cut every single one of them a check?
It's what we could get now. For example, in the city of LA, we know we get at least 60 million, but 60 million is, No, I mean, we have to, as a society, at some point, we have to decide, do we want to solve this problem or not?
Uh-huh.
And if we want to solve the problem, then we have to address it comprehensively, which means we have to prevent people from falling into homelessness to begin with.
Okay. So what we need is rental assistance. What we need is to make sure that anybody that is in danger of being evicted because they're not paying their rent, that we float them for a few months. We need a bigger safety net. Well, does that address the underlying problem of if the reason the person is not paying their rent is they have a massive mental illness or they've developed a horrific drug addiction? Because then we're just kind of enabling it to continue. I don't know if that's the answer. Measure H has spent a lot of money on preventing homelessness with zero results that it has worked.
And when Measure H and HHH was passed, people were not thinking about that. I understand it. I think the numbers at that time was 14,000, and HHH was supposed to build 10,000 units. Nobody accounted for the fact that the population would triple. And so it looks like in some people's eyes that Measure H and HHH failed. They didn't. The problem just, exploded.
And it's hard to prove a negative here, but this is one of the things that Karen Bass likes to say. Eric Garcetti said before it, if we didn't have the programs that we have, the number would be even higher. Sure, it went from 15,000 to 45,000 in the city of Los Angeles after we passed this tax, but that has nothing to do with it.
And so it looks like in some people's eyes that Measure H and HHH failed. They didn't. The problem just, exploded. So we are going to need more money, but in my opinion...
This is great. They literally just got a doubling of the money that's coming into the county, and Karen Bass immediately says, more, please?
We need to demonstrate to voters that we are more accountable, we're transparent, we can say what the outcome measures are. So we're going through these audits and all now, and we know what the audits are going to show. But to me, it was very important to jump in and save people's lives as opposed to spend the first 6 months diagnosing what was broken in the system.
But you just said that putting these people in housing without any other underlying solutions isn't solving the problem. So it seems like we spent a whole lot of money for 2 years to realize what we're doing isn't working.
And then spending the next 6 months on trying to fix it. I've been trying to do everything all at once. Conway Collis is here. He's the CEO of the Mayor's Fund. I inherited 2 nonprofits when I took over, and Eric used the Mayor's Fund for COVID relief. And we've changed it, and he's focusing on developing a model for prevention. Because, by the way, we don't have anything to replicate. There are no models around preventing homelessness. We're having to create models, address homelessness, change laws, and redesign the entire system, all at the same time.
She does that awkward laugh when she really doesn't know how to get out of a situation.
Change laws.
That's right. We need more money, and we need it now.
There are no models around.
And we need it to prevent homelessness, whatever exactly that means. I mean, one way you could prevent homelessness is if somebody's got a drug addiction, hopefully we'll see Prop 36, make sure that that person goes to a treatment center. It's going to be mandated, or you'll get a felony. If you have a mental illness, care court doesn't mean anything. It is a voluntary system. We need to go back to the point where we have locked facilities. I don't know why it is such a bad word around. We need to change the laws back to the point where there was a locked facility for these people to go to. Right now, for some reason, we have it as law that you can only have 16 people in one of those facilities. Otherwise, you're warehousing people. But as we have seen, we got to do better. We've got to get to Sacramento and DC, and we've got to change a lot of these laws that are enabling people to suffer. And, it's one thing about the drug addiction, but the severely mentally ill, the fact that we are not putting those people in a place where they can be healthy, that is cruel. And that's something that we need to change immediately. And just putting them in a motel is not solving their massive issues. 800-222-KABC is the phone number, 1-800-222-5222. What does preventing homelessness mean to you? I don't understand exactly what Karen Bass is getting at here. 800-222-KABC. It's the News Blitz with Randy Wang. We got lots more sound of Karen Bass at UCLA on Talk Radio 790 KABC. It's the News Blitz with Randy Wang on Talk Radio 790 KABC. We're going through the sound of LA Mayor Karen Bass at UCLA at a town hall talking about her homelessness policies. She was asked about the difference between her approach and now former San Francisco Mayor London Breed.
Wow, this is really nice.
London Breed, especially in the last few months, was a lot tougher, was going with Gavin Newsom's executive order to clear out homeless encampments, but it wasn't enough for her to keep her job. Karen Bass balked at Gavin Newsom's executive order, said we will not be clearing homeless encampments unless we have a motel for them to go to. Let's see what Karen Bass has to say about the comparison between her and London Breed.
Can I ask you, there's an interesting, I found it anyway, an interesting contrast between your approach and Mayor Breed in San Francisco, who's talked about citing homeless, breaking up encampments, a more forceful approach, I guess, at least tonally, if not in substance, and maybe that too. And her approach seeming more in line with at least the rhetoric of Gavin Newsom, Governor Newsom, who's advocated a more forceful breakup of encampments and whatnot. And I wonder, well, first of all, it turns out not, if that was politically motivated, it wasn't enough to save her since she lost her seat this week. But I wonder what explains, from your perspective, the difference in those two approaches in these two prominent cities on the West Coast, and why you have opted for a gentler approach of trying to lure people out of homelessness, where she seemed to have opted for a more forceful approach.
Well, and not talking about...
And I could argue you have seen a visual improvement in San Francisco. Los Angeles, you have seen a little bit of a visual improvement, but it's also really hard to compare because San Francisco is a very, very, very small city geographically, and Los Angeles is massive. Before we get back to the sound of Karen Bass, let's go to Graciela in Fountain Valley. Graciela, hello.
Hi there.
Hi.
I'm just wondering if anyone's ever asked the question, why are taxpayers even footing the bill for this homeless issue?
It's
why
a great
is the
question.
State taking money away from my family, away from my kids' mouths to take
You're
care
right.
of these
And the thing that's interesting is every single time the voters are asked to tax themselves on this issue, they say yes. Locally, they said it with Measure A this election. And in the primary statewide, voters said yes with Prop 1, the housing and mental health bed bond measure. Every time the voters in California are asked to tax themselves on this, they say yes overwhelmingly.
What the hell is going on? I have elderly parents that have worked their whole lives. They're U.S. citizens, and they get maybe $200 in food assistance. It is sickening. I listen to you every week, and it is maddening what Newsom's doing, what Bass Lake is doing. What's going on? Why isn't anyone waking up?
Well, that's what we're trying to do, is let people know what the policymakers are saying and what they're thinking. And if people don't like it, they have every opportunity to vote these people out in the next election. Graciela, thank you so much for the call. Appreciate it. 800-222-KABC is the phone number, 1-800-222-5222. It's the News Blitz with Randy Wang on Talk Radio 790 KABC. It is the News Blitz with Randy Wang on Talk Radio 790 KABC. We're here every single day from 5 to 6 talking about the local issues that matter to you most and taking your phone calls at 800-222-KABC, 1-800-222-5222. Your emails as well at randykabc@gmail.com, and give us a follow. Search for the KABC News Blitz on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. We're listening to Karen Bass explain her homelessness policy at UCLA. This was last week, and one of the questions was determining the difference between Karen Bass's approach and former San Francisco Mayor London Breed's approach.
Well, and not talking about her or her approach, I want to solve this. I want to end homelessness. The system was not designed to end homelessness. It was designed to manage homelessness. So if we want...
And by asking for a permanent tax and a whole bunch of housing that is going to be helping these people permanently, I don't know how exactly we're solving the problem. Then again, I don't know if you can solve the problem. This might be an impossible problem to fix.
So if we want to end homelessness, you get people housed and you take care of whatever it is. So to me, it's not a solve versus hard. It's one that is going to work versus isn't going to work. And the thing is that, and that was my concern around Grants Pass. So the Supreme Court basically has said you can arrest people. I think maybe one of the differences is I'm older. I mean, you and I have known each other for a long time.
That's true.
And we've seen this. We know this playbook. That's why I ran, because I was afraid that we were getting ready to repeat history. And in the 90s, which is I think when we first met, that was when mass incarceration was just beginning. And at that point, I was...
When you equate the massive street homelessness to the fact that, we didn't have that when we had mass incarceration, what you're telling me is all the people we let out of prison with AB 109, Prop 47 and 57, a lot of those people used to be housed, you could say.
That was when mass incarceration was just beginning. And at that point, I was... on the faculty at USC Medical School and with students, and I'm watching all these laws pass because of crack. And to me, crack was a health issue. Okay. And so what happens when voters get angry is that then they pass terrible policies. And I frankly think that...
Oh, we got so close.
That the reason we are in the situation now is because of bad policies that started really in the 80s. But because we had a fallout of our social safety net in the 80s, by the time the 90s hit, then we just wanted to punish everybody because we were mad. And so voters were saying, we've raised our taxes 3 times, and the problem just gets worse. They're all drug addicts, they're all mentally ill, just get them away from me.
And that's what happened. 70+% of voters said yes to Prop 36 because if we got rid of the drug addict component of it, or at least tackled it differently than right now begging people to get into treatment, and in some instances not even doing that, the amount of money that has been wasted in harm reduction ideology instead of treatment is criminal. All the people that could have gotten on the path to success, instead we've been enabling that behavior and prolonging someone's suffering.
And if they wind up being jailed, fine. Well, you and I know that doesn't work. It doesn't solve the problem. And you can push homeless people down the street. Do you want to end it or not? And I'll tell you what I'm obsessed with is the fact that the world is coming. And so where are we going to push?
That's not a good excuse. Oh, we need to clean this up because we have a whole bunch of fancy sporting events is not a great sell.
And so where are we going to push 70,000 people? So we have a choice here. Solve your problems and invite the world, or have the world come and see that you didn't even know how to clean your house. I mean, if you invite guests, you clean your house, right? You even clean your house before the housekeeper gets there. Because you don't...
Oldest joke in the book, but it gets a laugh.
Because you don't want the housekeeper to see how dirty it is. So why on earth would we want to invite the world here? And everybody's talking about 2028. I'm talking about 2026.
Coming up quick, yeah.
All-star basketball game, golf, and World Cup last 40 days.
Well, if you're focused on that, you've got 2 years to massively change what's going on. And considering how your first 2 years went, where you put a tiny dent in it, I don't know if that's happening.
8 games here, 2027, the Super Bowl, then we get around to the Olympics.
It does lead to the question, though, are any cities actually doing well at this?
It's all coming. Are there cities in the United States, excuse me, that are doing an especially good job of this that we could just copy? I mean, are there models out there that are more effective than what we've got going here?
Well, I think...
Then let's do it.
Well, I think a couple of things. New York. I think New York was effective because they designed a system of long-term interim housing. I remember going and visiting New York when I was in the state legislature, and they were beginning this then. And they bought a lot of hotels and stuff, so they have more homeless people than we do, but there are not as many on the street, and it's not just because of the weather. It's because of this system. Now, they also have a policy of a right to shelter, which, you know.
And that could be a way we could go. We could build enough interim immediate shelter space to get everyone off the streets immediately, and that would be way cheaper and quicker. This is what some people like the Union Rescue Mission have been talking about for years and years and years. When it's, we need to build everyone permanent supportive housing, that costs a lot of money and takes a really, really, really long time.
So New York.
I mean, you look at Triple H, not the wrestler, the measure that was passed in the city of Los Angeles that was supposed to build 10,000 units in 10 years. I think we've built like 3,000.
So New York, in terms of building interim, the way they did, or rather buying interim. And then Houston, I think, is a model everybody looks at. Houston is different in the sense that they've kind of taken their structure that we have inside of government, placed it outside of government in an independent nonprofit. So now we have...
But that's working? Can we do some of that?
So now we have several different governance models that we're looking at. But I'm going to tell you, again, what I find everywhere is the absence of health. And I'm not going to let that go. There's a lot of people who wind up being homeless because of medical conditions. I met a woman who eventually got fired from her job. She kept missing work. She wasn't feeling well, didn't really have adequate health care. She was in Texas, so. And she then was diagnosed with cancer. By then, she was living out of her car and had to go through chemotherapy while living in her car. Today, she is living at Hilda Solis's village, which is made up of storage containers, shipping containers.
That's a heartbreaking story. But we know that's not the majority of the people that are out there. We should have every possible way in the world to help somebody like that. And those are usually the people that are ready to accept any help that is out there to them.
On the housing piece of it, the city doesn't really build housing, right? So your job, as I would understand it, and explain, correct me if I'm wrong, is really more to clear obstacles to construction, to expedite it, one-stop, streamlining, et cetera.
It's to say yes, 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 all the housing. And even though we've had nothing but pro-housing policy in the state of California for a decade, and the county of Los Angeles and the city of Los Angeles, we're still at a massive housing shortage, and the cost of housing has only gone up exponentially.
But I guess...
Beaters in the Valley are now $1 million houses. I know.
But I guess I wonder whether that places too much faith ultimately in the market. I mean, if you streamlined everything and eliminated every obstacle to affordable housing
You'd have
construction,
a mess.
Yeah, I mean...
That's what Karen Bass did with her first executive order. She does admit it here, though.
Yeah, I mean, and also, wouldn't developers still want to develop higher-end housing anyway without those obstacles? So how do you create not just more housing, but specifically housing that will help these people who need this?
Well, I think that developers are willing to build affordable housing and lower income housing. I mean, developers are expecting a profit, and there are some developers that are willing to accept a lower profit.
Well, what we're doing is we're giving you a whole bunch of bonuses if you make that structure even taller, add a whole bunch of affordable units, and also we'll waive things like parking requirements, which makes it a lot cheaper for the developer so they can make a whole lot more money. But now it taxes the city because now everyone's looking for curb space. Because the fantasy that people living in an apartment will not own a car is just that, a fantasy.
And we found that when we did executive directives that expedite it, they were very willing to do that. But you know, one thing about policy is, to me, when you pass a policy, you should evaluate it to see whether it's working or not. I mean...
She knows that from experience.
I mean...
It's an idea.
Novel. And so we did the executive directive 1, and then it turns out we had some problems with it. And so we revised it and are continuing to revise it. One of the problems that we found was that it was going to essentially unleash a lot of building in single-family neighborhoods that apartments would be. And I know some people think that my concern was the higher income neighborhoods, but actually it was both, but it was the...
No, it was every kind of neighborhood, including middle-class neighborhoods. We heard about a tiny little cul-de-sac in Sherman Oaks where a single-family house was going to be demolished for a 7-story apartment building in a neighborhood that was not in any way prepared for it. And Karen Bass's executive order slashed all the red tape to the point where the city could not say no to that. And so what you see is developers buying up old properties all across the place, little duplexes, little triplexes, kicking out the current tenants, actually creating more people that are now out on the street, especially if it was an old rent-controlled building, and then building one of these massive complexes. We're actually making the problem worse.
But it was the lower income neighborhoods too, because what I found is for-profit developers were chomping at the bit to go to South LA and East LA, and I did not want to be responsible for the total transformation, which I believe ultimately would lead to gentrification. Because you can start off as a low income, but nobody says you have to do that for life.
Right.
One of the things is when you have affordable housing, it's artificially affordable. They say, okay, this is either going to be subsidized or we're going to keep it at this rate, but for only 10 years. Then it goes to market rate. So every year, more and more affordable housing goes back to market rate.
And so I was worried that they were going to completely change the character. And they were also going to displace people. Like, I'm just going to displace these 12 families, but I'm actually going to build 40 units. Okay, that's good, but what happens to the 12 families?
So she's acting like, okay, we've realized that that's a mistake and we're not doing that. We're not allowing that. Well, they absolutely are. I just used it. They are in neighborhoods like Boyle Heights where you have long-term tenants in rent-controlled duplexes and triplexes and small apartment buildings who are getting kicked out thanks to loopholes in the Ellis Act, where if the original owner sells to the developer saying they're getting out of the rental business, the new developer can kick everybody out there regardless if they're a good tenant or not. And if you happen to be in one of those places and you were living in the same place for 40 years and you were paying $1,200 for a 2-bedroom, well, good luck trying to find another place that will have that rate. So we're making this crisis worse while we're trying to fix it. Oh my goodness. We got lots more of Karen Bass at this town hall with UCLA. It's the News Blitz with Randy Wang on Talk Radio 790 KABC. It's the News Blitz with Randy Wang on KABC. If you'd like to email us, you could do so at randykabc@gmail.com. Vince writes in and says, what's the end game with homelessness? The county has proved that they are sympathetic to renters with a no eviction policy. I know the non-eviction policy just ended, but the county didn't care if the homeowner's situation was a dire financial one. We are not talking about renters. We're talking about the poor unhoused. There's no way to evict a person of that standing. Look long range. Some are motivated to improve the situation. Many are not motivated. The unmotivated are going to be a problem, maybe to some degree, wards of the state. Whatever they decide, the countdown clock to the Olympics will be here before you know it. War with the Karen Bass Town Hall on homelessness at UCLA next. It's the News Blitz with Randy Wang on KABC. It's the News Blitz with Randy Wang on KABC. We're listening to Karen Bass at her town hall on homelessness at UCLA. Let's hear how she measures success.
How are you measuring success in all of this? What will you, I mean, I know we've seen the tiniest dip, but a dip and a leveling maybe of the number of people who are unhoused on the street in the city and in the county. How will you know a year from now, 2 years from now, whether this is working? How are you measuring your own success?
Well, one, you really do measure it, meaning that if you're bringing people into housing, who are they? What happens to them? How long do they stay there?
It's been 2 years. How are we just getting to figuring this part out now?
If they fall out, why did they fall out? So how I will measure myself, first and foremost, is a significant reduction in street homelessness, which I think, we have seen.
Already happened.
A lot more to go. We do have to, success will also will be when Conway figures out the silver bullet to prevention, when we've actually created a model. And the other...
well, prevention will work in a few ways. One, if we have a lot more access to treatment and we have a lot more teeth with drug laws, maybe that will help. Because right now we let people languish on the streets. But two, there's some good intentions with the conservatorship reform and care court, but it's not nearly enough. People that have severe mental illness need to go to a facility. Some of them will never, ever get to the point where they can come out of that facility, but at least that is more humane than letting these people languish on the street.
And the other measure of success to me will be the comprehensive services that are tested, services. So, I have this dream of creating a headquarters, a healing center, maybe in one of the big hotels that we could buy, where we
maybe they'll buy the Ritz.
Where we co-locate county services. We have health clinics, we have education, LAUSD, community colleges. We have programming, because I'll tell you, one of the things that scares me to death is that we put these people in these motels and they have some services. What do they do all day and all night?
Well, I'll tell you what some of them do, and this was true in San Francisco and it's true in Los Angeles. There are a lot of people that have housing. They may have one of these hotel rooms with inside safe. If they still want to do drugs because they have not been compelled to not do drugs, they go back out on the street. Some of them have a tent, stay in an encampment during the day, and then go to the housing at night. There's a lot of that in San Francisco, and there's no way that is unique to there. That is what's going on in Los Angeles as well. So there's a little more sound of this, and maybe we'll get to it in John Phillips' show tomorrow, because Karen Bass is asked a whole bunch of things, including what the public can do. She wants the public to be housing these people. She gets asked if she gives money to panhandlers, but she also asks about the fact that there have been a lot of people in Inside Safe in the last 2 years who dropped out or died, and some of them drug overdoses. Well, that's an uplifting pre-Thanksgiving show. Thank you all so much for listening. It's so exciting to be here doing this show for you every single day, the local issues that matter to you most. If you ever miss an episode of this show, you can get it at kebc.com/newsblitz or search the KEBC News Blitz wherever you get podcasts. I'll see you tomorrow at 5 for another News Blitz with Randy Wang on Talk Radio 790 KABC.